My husband is a lawyer who turned every legal tool into a weapon against me. The night I tried to take our daughter to see my family changed everything. He said it so quietly. That was the thing about Daniel that nobody outside our house ever understood. He never needed to raise his voice. He had spent 15 years in courtrooms learning exactly how much damage a person could do with a perfectly controlled tone and precise language, and he brought all of that home with him every evening and set it down at the kitchen table the way other husbands set down their briefcases. He looked at me across the counter that Thursday night, while our daughter Lily was upstairs doing homework, and he said, "If you take her across that state line without my written consent, I will have you back in front of a judge before you land. And I promise you, you do not want to know what I will file." He said it the way he said everything. Measured. Certain. With the particular stillness of a man who has never needed to be loud because he has always had something louder than volume at his disposal. I stood in my own kitchen holding my phone with my mother's voice still on the other end of the line, and I understood, in a way I had been circling for 2 years without fully landing on, that I was not in a marriage anymore. I was in a case. And I was the opposing party. Let me tell you who Daniel was before I tell you who he became. Not to excuse what came later, but because the distance between those two versions of the same person is part of what made it so difficult to see clearly for so long. I met him 12 years ago at a friend's gathering, a small evening that I had almost cancelled on because I was tired and the week had been long. He was 31 and already making a name in family law, which I found interesting without understanding the specific irony it would later carry. He was attentive in the way that some people are attentive when they have decided they want something, fully present, asking questions that showed he had actually listened to the answers. He was funny in a dry and understated way. He was the kind of man that parents and friends look at and say without hesitation, "He is a good choice." We married 3 years later. Lily arrived 2 years after that. For the first 4 years of the marriage, the control was invisible to me because it was dressed as care. He handled the finances because he was better with numbers. He advised on major decisions because he had more experience navigating complex situations. He had strong opinions about where we lived and how we spent weekends and who we spent time with, and those opinions always arrived wrapped in reasonable language, in the vocabulary of practicality and long-term thinking, and I had accepted them as the reasonable preferences of a reasonable man. The unwrapping happened slowly. The way it always happens. Not a single reveal but a gradual accumulation of moments where the reasonable preference started to feel like something with an edge. The first time I registered the edge clearly was about 2 years ago. My mother had been unwell, nothing critical but enough to need help for a few weeks, and I told Daniel I wanted to take Lily for a long weekend to spend time with her. My mother lived 4 hours away by plane, a different state, a trip we had made together as a family several times without incident. He said he would need to check his schedule before he could confirm. I said I was not asking him to come. I was telling him Lily and I were going. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, in the careful tone he used when he was introducing a concept he wanted to establish rather than simply communicate, "She's a minor. Interstate travel with a minor requires both parents to be aligned. That's not my preference, that's the law." I did not know enough at that point to know whether that was true. I know now that it is considerably more nuanced than he presented it. I know now that married parents generally have equal rights to travel domestically with their children and that the restrictions he was citing applied primarily to international travel or situations involving specific court orders. I know now that what he said was technically adjacent to the law without being an accurate representation of my actual rights. But I did not know that then. And he knew I did not know it. And he used my not knowing the way he used everything, precisely. I did not take Lily that weekend. I told my mother I would come alone for a few days and Daniel agreed to that without resistance, which told me something I filed away without yet knowing what category it belonged to. He did not object to me going. He objected to Lily going. The distinction was about Lily. Lily was a leverage point. I had not yet fully understood that. But I was beginning to. The 2 years between the conversation and the Thursday night at the kitchen counter were a study in gradual escalation that I now understand with a clarity I did not have while I was inside it. Each new limit arrived wrapped in the same reasonable language. Each time I pushed back, he introduced a new piece of legal framework that positioned my pushback as naive at best and legally risky at worst. He was careful never to forbid me from doing things directly. He was careful to always frame it as information. As him, the lawyer, simply making sure I understood the implications of what I was proposing to do. I want to tell you what that does to a person over time. Not the dramatic version. The quiet version. The version that happens inside a normal-looking house while a child does homework upstairs and the neighbors wave from the driveway and nothing from the outside looks like anything other than fine. It makes you uncertain. Specifically uncertain about your own judgment. Because the person introducing the uncertainty is someone who speaks with authority and who has, in other contexts, been right about complex things, and who never tells you directly that you are wrong but only that you might not fully understand. The legal language creates a particular kind of fog. You are never quite sure what you are allowed to do. You are never quite sure where the line is. And because you are never quite sure, you default to asking. And asking requires his input. And his input comes with conditions. And the conditions slowly build a structure around your movement that looks, from the outside, like a marriage and feels, from the inside, like something you cannot name yet. My sister Nadine was the first person to name it. She had been watching from a distance for years with the specific concern of someone who loves you and sees things you are too close to see. She visited twice in those 2 years, and both times she left quieter than she arrived, and both times she called me a few days later and said things carefully in the way people say things when they are trying to open a door without forcing it. The second call she stopped being careful. She said, "He is using the law the way some men use their fists. You don't have bruises but you have the same look. You ask permission for things that are yours by right. You flinch before you finish sentences about what you want. That is not a marriage with a difficult man. That is something else." I told her she was overstating it. I told her Daniel was intense and controlling in certain ways but that he loved us and that the legal references were his way of managing anxiety about Lily's safety. I had a whole vocabulary for it by that point, an internal translation system that converted his behavior into something more manageable. Nadine said, "The next time he makes a legal argument to stop you from doing something that is your right, look it up. Don't ask him. Look it up yourself." I did not do it immediately. I did it 3 weeks later when the trip to my mother came up again, this time for a family occasion that genuinely required Lily's presence, and Daniel introduced the same framework in the same careful tone, and I went upstairs after the conversation, and I sat on the edge of our bed with my phone and I searched. What I found took about 40 minutes to understand and about 3 days to fully absorb. Married parents in our state have equal legal rights to travel domestically with their minor children. There is no requirement for written consent from the other parent for interstate travel within the country. The restrictions he had been citing, the ones he had been presenting as legal fact for 2 years, apply to international travel and to situations where a court order specifically restricted movement. We had no court order. We had no custody agreement. We had a marriage. And in that marriage I had exactly the same rights to take my daughter to visit her grandmother as he did. He had known this. He was a family lawyer. He had spent 15 years in this precise area of law. He had not made an error. He had made a choice. He had chosen, deliberately and consistently, to present a version of the law that was adjacent to the truth but that functioned to limit my movement without appearing to do so directly. He had used his expertise not to protect our family but to contain me within it. I sat on the edge of that bed for a long time. And then I booked the flights. I did not tell him immediately. I bought the tickets, sent my mother the dates, packed Lily's bag in my head, and waited 3 days before I said anything. I waited because I needed to be certain before I was in the room with him. I needed to know what I knew without the fog of his legal language making me doubt it. I told him on a Thursday. I said Lily and I were going to visit my mother the following weekend. I gave him the dates. I said I had looked into the legal requirements for domestic travel with a minor and I was confident I understood my rights. The kitchen went very quiet. He looked at me in a way I had not seen before. Not the controlled patience of a man explaining something to someone who does not understand. Something behind that. Something recalibrating. And then he said the words he said. About the state line. About the judge. About the filing. And I stood there with my mother still on the phone and I understood that the fog had lifted and what was underneath it was not ambiguity. It was a threat. Plain and simple, wrapped in legal language, delivered in a controlled tone. A threat from a man who had spent 2 years using his expertise to make me uncertain of my own rights, and who was now watching that uncertainty fail, and who was reaching for the only tool he had left. I said, very quietly, "I'll call you back, Mum." I put the phone down on the counter. I looked at my husband. And for the first time in 2 years, I looked at him without the fog. What I saw was not what I had been telling myself I was living with. And Lily was upstairs. Doing her homework. In the house where all of this had been happening around her for 2 years without her knowing what to call it either. That was the moment everything shifted. Not because I had a plan. Because I finally had a clear view. And what I could see from there was something I could not unsee. I did not respond to the threat that night. I want to be clear about that because the decision to not respond immediately was the first real decision I had made in 2 years that was entirely mine, uncontaminated by his framework or his language or the fog of legal uncertainty he had built around me. I picked up my phone and I called my mother back and I told her we were coming. I gave her the dates. I said I would explain everything when I saw her. Then I went upstairs and I checked on Lily, who was at her desk with headphones in, entirely unaware, and I keyed at the top of her head and she pulled one headphone off and smiled at me and went back to her work. I came back downstairs. Daniel was in his office. The door was closed. I went to bed. That night I did something I had not done in 2 years. I called Nadine. Not a careful, managed call. A real one. I told her what he had said. I told her what I had found when I looked up the law. I told her about the 2 years of legal language used as containment. I told her all of it, the full version, without the translation system I had been running it through. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "You need to speak to your own lawyer. Not to start something. To understand where you actually stand before he gets to define that for you again." I had thought about this. The barrier had always been the same. Daniel knew everyone in family law in our city. The professional network was his. Going to a lawyer felt like walking into his territory. Nadine said, "Go outside the city. Go somewhere he doesn't have reach." I made an appointment the following week with a family law attorney 2 cities over. I used my personal email account that Daniel did not have access to. I paid the consultation fee from my personal account. I told no one except Nadine. The attorney's name was Patricia. She was in her late 50s and had the specific quality of someone who had heard many versions of this particular story and was not going to waste either of our time with surprise. I told her everything in a 1-hour consultation. She took notes. When I finished, she went through what I had told her methodically. She confirmed what I had found. Domestic travel rights. Equal standing as a married parent. No court order restricting movement. The threats he had made were legally hollow. Not meaningless, she was careful to say, because a man with his resources and network could create significant procedural difficulty even without a strong legal foundation. But hollow at the core. What he had been doing for 2 years was not law. It was leverage. She then said something that reframed everything I had been living inside. She said, "What you are describing is a pattern. The legal language is the mechanism, but the pattern is control. Courts take this seriously now in ways they did not 10 years ago. The question is not whether you have rights. You have rights. The question is what you want to do with them." I sat with that for a long time. What I wanted was not immediately clear even to me. I had spent 2 years so focused on navigating his framework that I had not fully asked myself what I wanted outside of it. The trip to my mother was not the destination. It was the beginning of understanding that I had a destination that was mine to choose. I took Lily to see my mother that weekend. Daniel did not file anything. No judge. No emergency motion. Nothing. The silence from him in the 24 hours after I left with Lily was the loudest confirmation of everything Patricia had told me. The threat had been a threat. It had not been a promise backed by legal substance. It had been the last tool of a man watching the fog lift and reaching for the only thing he had left. My mother held Lily for a long time when we arrived. Lily was delighted, the easy delight of a child who loves her grandmother and had not understood why visits had become so infrequent. She ran through the house touching the familiar things. She asked to call her grandfather. She sat at the kitchen table and ate the food my mother had made and talked and laughed and was, in every visible way, entirely fine. I sat across from my mother that evening after Lily was in bed and I told her the full version of the last 2 years. My mother is not a woman who reacts dramatically. She listened carefully and when I finished she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "I wondered." I kept wondering and I kept telling myself I was wrong because he was always so polite to me. That was the architecture of it. He was always polite. He was never cruel in visible ways. The control lived in private language and private moments and private fog that did not travel well into rooms where other people could see it. The marriage did not end that weekend. I want to be honest about the timeline because these things do not move in the clean sequence that stories sometimes impose on them. I came home. I sat inside the house that had become a structure I understood differently. I watched Daniel operate in the days after my return with the specific attention of a person who has had their translation system updated and is now hearing the original language clearly for the first time. What I heard was consistent. The control was not a phase or a response to stress. It was a method. It was how he organized the world around him and how he organized me within it. And the method had been working well enough for long enough that he had become skilled at it in ways that would not stop because I had taken one trip. I went back to Patricia. I told her I wanted to understand my options. Not a decision. Options. I needed to know what the terrain looked like before I could decide where to stand in it. She walked me through everything. Asset considerations. Custody arrangements given Lily's age. What his professional network in the local family law community meant as a practical matter and how to navigate around it. She was precise and unglamorous about all of it, which was what I needed. No drama. Just information. The same kind of information he had been withholding from me for 2 years while presenting a version of it designed to serve his purposes. I told her about Lily. About what Lily had seen and not seen. About the way children absorb the architecture of their home without having the language for what they are absorbing. Patricia said, children who grow up watching one parent use expertise and authority to control another parent learn things about relationships that take years to unlearn. Sometimes they do not unlearn them. I thought about Lily at her desk with her headphones in. I thought about what she had been taking in over 2 years without either of us narrating it for her. I thought about who she was becoming inside this house and what I was teaching her about what a marriage looked like and what a woman's options were within it. That thought was the one that finally became a decision. Not anger. Not the accumulated weight of 2 years of legal language and manufactured fog. My daughter at her desk. What she was learning without knowing she was learning it. I filed 6 weeks after the trip to my mother. The process was exactly what Patricia had prepared me for, which is to say difficult, professionally complicated given his network, and extended in the way that these things extend when one party has resources and expertise and motivation to make it slow. He was not gracious. He was not the controlled, quiet man of the kitchen counter in the professional settings the process required. He was strategic and thorough, and he used every tool available to him, which was considerable. But I had Patricia. And I had documentation I had been quietly building since the night I looked up the law and found what I found. And I had the clarity that comes from finally knowing what you are dealing with and refusing to be uncertain about it anymore. Lily lives primarily with me. That is what the arrangement became after 9 months of process. Daniel has consistent time with her, which is right and which I did not contest, because whatever he was to me he was genuinely present as a father, and Lily loves him and that love is hers to have. She is 9 now. She knows that her parents live in different houses. She does not know the full version of why. She will know more when she is older, calibrated to what she can hold at each age, told honestly and without using her as a vehicle for my own grievances. I live in an apartment now that is mine entirely. The lease has my name on it. The decisions are mine. When I want to take Lily to visit my mother, I book the flights and I go, and nobody in a kitchen tells me what the law does or does not permit in a tone designed to make me uncertain of what I am allowed to want. I want to tell you what I wish I had known earlier. Not as a list. As one thing. The one thing that would have changed the timeline. Your rights do not require his interpretation. Whatever expertise the person across from you holds, whatever authority they have accumulated, whatever language they use to describe the legal or financial or practical reality of your situation, that description is not the only available description. It is their description. And when the person providing the description has an interest in your uncertainty, the description is not neutral. Look it up. Find your own Patricia. Ask the questions he has made you feel unqualified to ask. You are not unqualified. You are uninformed, which is a temporary condition with a straightforward remedy. The fog is not the truth. It is a method. And the moment you see the method clearly, it stops working. That is the only thing I know with complete certainty on the other side of all of this. The fog only works while you are standing inside it. Step out. Look at it from the outside. And then decide what you want to do with what you can finally see. Because what you can see, when you are finally standing in the clear, is that the rights were always yours. He just needed you not to know that. And the day you knew it, everything changed.